Push record here. So we'll post the recording on our YouTube channel, and we'll also share it out in this week's CCS News in case you want to rewatch it or share it with your colleagues that were not able to attend today. So let's get rolling. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Find More Illinois. Thank you all so much for coming. So why are we here today talking about Find More Illinois? At their meeting next month in November, governing board will vote on whether the consortium should move forward with joining Find More Illinois as a group. So ahead of that discussion and vote, we wanted to host a webinar and demo of Find More Illinois so that all of our members could have the chance to learn a little bit about Find More Illinois and have the chance to ask questions about how it works. So, joining me today from CCS is our Executive Director, Rebecca Malinowski, and our Member Services Librarian, Rachel Fisher. So, they'll be helping me manage questions and different parts of the demo. And we also have today from Rails, we have Eric Bain, Technology Special Projects Coordinator, and Barb Miller, Consortial Services Supervisor. So both Eric and Barb will be helping CCS answer your questions about Find More Illinois functionality. So here's our agenda for today. So we'll start out with an overview of the project and why we're looking at Find More Illinois. So that's going to include a review of a preliminary timeline for the project if governing board votes yes next month. After that, I'll give a brief demo of the Find More Illinois workflow so that you can see how the software works and how it integrates with Polaris. And then we'll end the session with plenty of time for questions for both CCS and Rail staff. So today's focus is really on familiarizing ourselves with how Find More Illinois works and giving all of you the chance to ask questions about functionality. So this will help CCS and your directors prepare for that November discussion and vote. So after the session is over, we'll compile an FAQ and share it along with the recording in this week's newsletter. So you should see that go out tomorrow. So throughout the session, if you have questions, please go ahead and pop them in the chat. Rebecca is going to be monitoring the chat today and queuing up all of your questions for answering throughout the session. I will say there may be questions that we don't have the answers to yet. And if that's the case, we'll do our best to follow up after the session is over. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into that project overview. So what is Find More Illinois? So Find More Illinois is a statewide interlibrary loan platform that is managed by Rails, and any library can join. Find More is run on Autographic's ShareIt software. So you're going to hear me reference the ShareIt software throughout the demo a bit later in this webinar. Patrons and staff alike log into ShareIt to place and manage ILL requests. And those requests are then delivered to the patron's pickup library through Rails delivery. So who currently participates in Find More Illinois? It has approximately 60 members at this time. Those are primarily public libraries with a small handful of academic, school, and special libraries. You can view the complete list of members online on the Find More Illinois website. So why is CCS looking at Find More Illinois? Our primary reason for exploring membership is the potential to support resource sharing more broadly. If CCS joins Find More Illinois, we'd be approximately like doubling the number of items available for lending through that platform, and that's a big deal. It would allow CCS to share our collections with libraries who may be unable to afford or join CCS or another consortium for various reasons, including cost, especially those smaller libraries that are within our service area. So joining Find More can also be seen as an investment into Illinois libraries. Our libraries, like I mentioned, have really big collections, and if we join Find More, this could incentivize other libraries to join as well. And we could really help build Find More into a strong resource sharing platform that benefits the larger Illinois library community. So we do know that for CCS, Find More is not currently a suitable replacement for OCLC. If we're to join Find More next month, we will remain OCLC members. However, if we can help Find More grow and expand, it could become an alternative to OCLC in the future for libraries whose needs it would meet. And then, like last but not least, FindMore really offers a streamlined borrowing experience for end users and for staff. And you'll see that in just a few minutes with that demo. Almost every FindMore library that I've talked to has said that it's actually easier to use than OCLC, which makes it a worthwhile platform for us to investigate. So, where are we at with this investigation? We've done a lot of work so far. Earlier this year, Rachel completed a preliminary investigation and report into the service, after which CCS then marked FindMore as a potential project that was in line with one of our organization's guiding principles, which is to, of course, support resource sharing. So we brought it to governing board back in August, and they gave CCS the go ahead to continue on with our investigation. So since that meeting, CCS has met several times with Rail staff to talk about things like workflow, logistics, setup, pricing, and so on. We've also spent time meeting with staff from the Pinnacle Library Cooperative. They're another Polaris consortia, and they kind of walked us through how ShareIt integrates with Polaris in a consortia environment. Rachel and I have also been out and about visiting a handful of member libraries to talk about existing ILL workflow and how FindMore could fit into that. So, thank you to all of those libraries who had us out to visit, and thank you for sharing all of your expertise with us. I know I learned a lot from those visits. So today we're hosting this informational webinar to share the information we've learned so far, and afterwards we'll work on follow-up items, including an FAQ. So we're currently in the process of reaching out to existing FindMore members for feedback on how FindMore is working for them. And we're also preparing a more detailed report to send to governing board ahead of their November meeting. So at the November 8th governing board meeting, directors will discuss FindMore membership. And at that time, they'll vote on whether we should move forward with FindMore Illinois as a group. If they vote no, then we won't move forward in a group capacity, though individual libraries certainly could join on their own, and we at CCS would work to support that on the Polaris end. If governing board votes yes, then we'll jump into the project that same month right away. So let's look at that timeline if governing board votes yes in November. Autographics, which is the company that provides ShareIt that FindMore runs on, they're offering waived setup fees for those libraries that joined FindMore Illinois before the end of the calendar year. So to take advantage of that pricing, we'd begin completing our partnership agreements and setup forms shortly after governing board in November and early December. At that time, CCS would also begin working with Innovative on that Polaris setup. So once all of our ducks are like in a row when it comes to paperwork, Autographics would begin working on setup and configuration for CCS libraries. So we've set aside the months of like January and February to work on that piece. Once setup is complete, we'd begin testing and training in March and April, and then that would bring us to a phased rollout in late spring, early summer, around May or June of next year. So let's talk a little bit about kind of big picture project responsibilities if governing board votes to move forward with FindMore as a group. In that scenario, CCS would take on the main project management role for joining FindMore. So we'd manage that high level organization and communication for the project. We'd issue out assignments and communicate important information out to all of you. And we generally keep things on track and moving forward. We'd facilitate completion of paperwork and setup documents. We'd coordinate Polaris and Sherrit configuration and collaborate with that with Autographics, Rails, and innovative staff. We'd schedule and lead training in conjunction with Rails staff, and we'd create supporting documentation and training materials for our members. And of course, we'd coordinate that rollout again in late spring or early summer. So members, all of you, would work with CCS in the next 2 months to complete those partnership agreements and setup forms. In January and February, you'd consult with us on config and settings. And then your staff would attend training and help us with testing in March and April of next year. Um, you would work with CCS to incorporate FindMore into your existing ILL workflows. And then we'd plan for that rollout with you in May and June. And of course, you'd promote FindMore Illinois to your patrons in an ongoing capacity. So I'm going to pause here and see if any questions came in.
There's nothing in the chat at this time.
Okay, sounds great. Feel free again, pop those questions in the chat as they come up. So we can kind of move into our demo portion. So today I'm going to demo the workflow from two different sides. I'm going to demo as a library, borrowing material on behalf of my patron, and then as a lending library, supplying material to a different FindMore Illinois library. So today's session isn't meant to be a comprehensive training session, but more of a high-level overview of the FindMore Illinois workflow. So if governing board does vote to join FindMore, we're going to have much more detailed training as part of that onboarding process next year. So today's demo is going to take place in the live FindMore environment. So Rails has set me up with test staff and patron accounts. So I'm going to be working exclusively with test records in FindMore Illinois so that I don't accidentally request like real items from actual member libraries. Now, because we are not FindMore members, we don't actually have FindMore connected to our Polaris database. However, our friends over at the Pinnacle Library Cooperative, they are both Polaris customers and they are also FindMore customers as well. They've provided us with some screenshots so that I can walk you through those steps. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and hop on over to our training pack so we can get the demo started. Okay, hopefully you can all see our training catalog, and this is where our demo is going to start today. So let's pretend that I am a library patron searching the catalog, and I'm looking for the title Hostage by Claire McIntosh. So I'm going to type my search terms into the catalog, and I'm going to initiate my search. Now you can see for this search, the catalog is telling me that there are no results found for this title. However, right below that message, I'm shown a little icon for FindMore Illinois, as well as the suggestion to try searching additional Illinois libraries through FindMore Illinois. So if I click this link to FindMore Illinois, I'm going to be routed or redirected to the FindMore Illinois interface. And you can see that FindMore Illinois, they took my search terms from my PowerPack or catalog search and reinitiated that search with those same exact search terms. So now as a patron, I can look through my search results and the titles and records that match my search terms and find the one that I'm looking for. So in this example, I'm going to go ahead and select the Hostage FindMore Illinois test record. Again, I'm going to be working exclusively with these test records today. So once I find that title that I'd like to request, I can click that request button. Once I click that request button, I'm going to be prompted to enter in my library card number and my password. So again, this is the same library card number that your patrons use to log into the catalog. Once I've entered in my barcode and my PIN number, I'm going to click Submit. Once I click Submit, I'm going to see my hold request screen. Now, really here, the patron shouldn't need to fill out any additional information. The title information at the top here, including author, title, etc., is being pulled from the Find More Illinois database. And my patron information at the bottom is being pulled from the ILS from Polaris. So that includes my name, my library card number, and my email address. So once I've verified all the info looks correct, I can click the Submit button to place that request. Once I click that button, I'm going to receive confirmation that my request has successfully been submitted, and that the system is going to check for lenders to fill this request. So after I see that, I can click OK. And then as the patron, my job is like done here. So now I get to kind of sit back and wait for another library to fill my hold request. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch over from the patron view to the staff side because I want to show you what Find More or Share It looks like on the back end when one of your patrons places a request. Oop, wrong one. Okay, so here I am in the staff side of Share It. So you can see it looks very similar to the patron interface. Um, you can see here in the right-hand corner, I'm logged in as CCS staff. I've already logged in. Um, and then up in the upper left-hand corner, I have an expanded menu options, including a staff dashboard. When you expand the staff dashboard, you'll see some additional menu items, including ILL admin, statistics, and support. So for today's demo, I'm mainly going to be working in ILL admin in the request manager. So I'm going to go ahead and open that request manager so we can take a look. So the request manager is split into two sides. The left side are your library's borrower requests, and then the right side are your library's lender requests. So going back to my patron who placed a hold on Hostage by Claire McIntosh. Once that request is placed, it's going to go on my borrower side in the request manager into my list of pending requests. So your items awaiting a trading partner response. So these are all of your requests that are kind of waiting on the other library to do something. So go ahead and open my pending requests. And in my library's pending requests, we can see that there are two pending requests for patrons of my library. And here is that request for Hostage. So I don't really have to do anything right now with this request. What's going to happen is this request will be sent on to another library to fill. So off screen, Rachel is going to be acting as my lending library. So she is going to be holding this item for my patron, marking it as shipped in the Share It software, putting it in Rails delivery, and sending it over to my library for my patron. So Rachel, let us know when you're done with that.
I marked it as shipped.
All right, perfect. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to refresh my request manager. So now that the lending library has sent a copy in transit for my patron, that request has now moved from pending up to shipped. So if I open my library's shipped requests, now we'll see that title appear in this list. So now I'm going to wait for this item to arrive at my library. And so this item, again, it's going to come to my library through the Rails delivery bin, and that item will have a a Rails shipping label attached to it so that staff who are processing the Rails bin will easily be able to identify it as a Find More Illinois title. So when staff are processing that bin, they see this item come in, it's got that Rails shipping label for Find More on it, they'll know to give that then to me, to ILL staff to process and share it. So once I've got that item in hand, I can go to my shipped requests and open that request. And here I'm going to change that status from shipped to received. Once I change it from shipped to receive, I'll click submit. And several things are happening when I click mark this item as received. So share it is communicating with Polaris through NCIP protocol. So it's pushing out information about this request to our Polaris database. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint so that I can show you exactly what's happening on the Polaris end. So when that title is received in Share It, Polaris is creating both a brief bibliographic record and an item record for the title. So in this screenshot here, we can see this brief bib for hostage. At the same time that the brief bib and the item record are created, the item is automatically trapped for the requesting patron in Polaris, and Polaris will generate that hold notice and send it to the patron to let them know that a hold is ready for pickup. So again, all of this is happening without staff intervention. Shared is pushing this information out to Polaris, and it's happening automatically when that item is received. When that patron comes into the library to pick up their ILL request, staff will check that item out to the patron as normal. And then when the item is returned, staff are going to go ahead and give that item to ILL staff to finish processing and share it. So I'm going to go back to share it now. So again, let's say that patron, they checked out that copy of the item, they finished reading it, and then they brought it back to the library when they were done. Again, staff give that item to ILL staff to complete processing and share it. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of refresh my request manager here and share it. So now that title had been received. So now what I need to do is my patron's done with it. I need to return it and get it back to that lending library. So in Share It, again, I'm going to open up my list of received requests. I'm going to find that title that has now been returned by my patron, in this case, hostage. I'm going to open that request record, and I'm going to change the status from received to returned and click submit. So when I mark this item as returned, again, Share It is communicating back with Polaris, and this item is now checked in off of the patron's account, and that item and brief bib record have now been marked for deletion. Again, that happens automatically. Staff don't need to do anything to delete that bib or that item. So now I've got to put this returned item back in Rails delivery to go back to its home library. That item may still have a shipping label from when it was delivered to the library, but just in case, we can always go back into the request manager or ILL settings to reprint that shipping label. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to open my ILL admin menu, and I'm going to select Print Shipping Labels. So in my list of unprinted shipping labels, I can find the request or item that needs the label. In this example, hostage, check the box next to that title and click Format to print. This will open up a new window with that shipping label. And you can see that these shipping labels are kind of split into two sides. We have one side for the delivery shipping label, and then the other side for the return shipping label. So you would just fold this shipping label in half, pop that return side up, attach it to the item, and put it back in your Rails delivery bin. And Rails will take care of sending that item back to the item's owning library. And so then at this point, you are done. That item has been placed back in Rails delivery. Rails will get it back to the lending library, and you are all good to go here. So I see kind of lots of notifications about chats here. So I'm going to pause and see what questions we might have about the borrowing side.
All right. Well, I have recorded some excellent questions from the group on patron experience. There's a couple of questions that I'm going to save till later. So if you put a question in and I don't ask Deborah right now, it is not forgotten. So one question is, will we standardize what shows up in the catalog no results screen? Routing to WorldCat is another option. So I'd be interested in best practices for what should show up if there's no results. Deborah, in the chat, I did provide a preliminary answer that if governing board moves forward, we'll have some centralized items we'll need to discuss. So this is an area that we'd probably still have to decide as a group. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would say that currently that page, the no results found, is standardized. So we'd likely want to keep standardization there, but like you said, we would work to figure out some best practices for that as we would move through the project.
Okay. Another patron related question. Will FindMore reject an item request for something that CCS already owns?
Yes, that is correct. We can set up FindMore. We have kind of a few different options. We can absolutely, though, set it up to reject any requests on titles where a copy is owned at any of our member libraries, which we would probably want to do.
Okay. And how does pickup location get selected when using Find More Illinois?
This is a good example of something that we'll have to discuss if governing board votes to move forward. So we have a couple of options for pickup location. We do have the option to limit the pickup location to just the patron's home, library, or branches. We also have the option, though, to allow like pickup anywhere within CCS. So this is an example of a setting that during config and setup, we may need to go to our groups to discuss and come to a decision on how we'd want to move forward with that. But we do have a couple of options there.
So does the patron select their hold location as they're placing their hold?
They do. Let me just go back. Let me go back to that. So if I click the request button, all the way at the bottom of the request screen is pickup location options. Again, I'm in a test site that's associated with Rails, so the only pickup options I'm going to see are the Rails offices. But in a real life example, the patron would see at least their home library. So if I'm an Algonquin patron, I would see the Algonquin branches as pickup location options. Or depending on which way we would go, if we move forward, maybe they would see all CCS locations as pickup options. But again, that's a decision we'd make later on. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I will watch the chat.
Okay.
We have my gosh, there's so many questions. I'm loving it. So
I know, I can
have
just
a
see
lot
the
of
number of questions go up.
about records. So I'm going to wait on those. I just want to make sure we hit all of these like patron related questions. Okay, so a question about borrowing is, would we be able to see how many libraries own the material? With OCLC, it might indicate that we're the only ones who owns that material. Oh, is that about lending? That might be a lending question. Okay, so we'll come to your lending question. We'll let Deborah do her lending demo, and then we'll circle back to that. There is another question. Will RBPs or patrons with blocked accounts be prevented from requesting items?
That is a good question. I imagine, and I might defer to Eric on this one because he is the expert on all things Find More. I believe we will have the option to either allow or not allow reciprocal patrons to place requests through Find More. Um, I am not sure about how patron blocks are handled though. So Eric, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and kind of give an answer to that one.
Sure. So absolutely, patrons with blocks can be prevented from placing holds within your shared accounts. They'll be able to log in, they'll be able to search, but they will not be able to initiate a request if they have blocks in your Polaris system. But the question touches upon a weak point in the system as well. Can RBPs place requests within your shared account? And the answer currently is yes, because ShareIt does not take the patron type into account. If it's a patron in your file, your patron file, shared patron file, and they don't have blocks, ShareIt will accept a request from any patron.
Thanks, Eric. I was wrong on that one. I apologize for giving the incorrect answer first, but thank you for giving the right one second.
Let's see. We're getting a lot of questions about loaning, so I'm making a list of that. One question is, a returned item should be sent to the Burridge office and not directly to the lending library. I think that's just because we're in the test system. The returned items will go to the lending library. That's what'll print out on the slip.
Yes, that is 100% correct. My accounts are associated with the Rails offices, so that's why you're going to see their names listed on the slip. But in real life, it would be your library listed and then the lending library as well.
Okay. Ben's got a question for Rails that we'll have to get some more information on and address later. A couple of questions, I think, on the staff side of borrowing. Will a hold slip be printed when the brief bib record and item is changed to ready for pickup? How do staff get hold slips for those materials?
Yeah, so Polaris wouldn't automatically print the hold slip when kind of ShareIt pushes that out to Polaris. So I think you would just check it in again to trigger that hold slip or the wrapper.
Staff lending. I promise I have this whole other sheet of questions that are going to come your way, Deborah.
Okay, I'm ready, I think.
Okay. I have two questions on lost materials. And so maybe this will be covered in lending or maybe not. How would you mark an item as claims returned or lost? And if a CCS copy of an item is lost or damaged, can a request be made? Oh, is that second question, if there's only like one copy in CCS and it's not available, can we request it through Find More? Whereas normally if CCS owns it, it's going to get rejected.
I believe we would be able to request it in Find More, and that's something we would work with Rails to configure during the setup process. Eric, can you confirm that like a lost item in our database that a patron could successfully place a request in Find More if there were additional copies there?
Yes, you do have that option, so that if your damaged or missing statuses indicate that your local item isn't available, ShareIt can go ahead and allow the request on a Find More Illinois item. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And then on either side, how would you mark an item as claims returned or lost?
I believe I'm just going to pull up my screen here and place another request so I can walk through this, but I believe there's the option to do that. You want to do another question, Rebecca, while I maybe get this example ready to go?
Yeah, there is a general question about the impact on the CCS database on searching. will this bog down searching? And at this time, we don't have concerns about that. This connection comes through NSIP, so it's different than some of the other processes where we're like a little bit more concerned about like jobs running into each other. Also, what we've
Rebecca,
seen.
could I respond to that as well?
Sure.
Just to clarify.
Hit us with it, Eric.
So as soon as your patrons click that link that redirects them to Share It, that open URL is searching the Share It database. So it's searching the Find More Illinois Union catalog. It's not doing anything on the Polaris side for CCS. Anything that's searching Share It will be against our union catalog, and it will offload any processing from your local system.
There you go.
Yeah, and we also have touched base with Innovative on this as well about, does having this NSIP connection to our database impact our response times in any capacity? And they didn't have any concerns with that. Of course, it's something we continue to monitor if we were to move forward. But as of now, there seem to be no concerns about that connection impacting our response times.
So Deborah, we do still have questions left, but they're about brief records and staff lending. So I think we should move forward with your next step. Well, you can whatever you were pulling up on your screen if you want to do that. But I think that we can proceed when you're ready.
Sure. I do just want to quickly show, there was a question about marking items as lost. So here's an example of a request that has been shipped to me. In that previous demo, we had marked this kind of shipped request as received. There is the option within Find More to then mark the item as lost, potentially if it doesn't arrive at your library within a certain amount of time. I'm just going to mark that request as received and go back and reopen this request. Again, within this request record of this received item, there is the option to then mark it as lost. Eric, do you want to are you able to kind of speak to what happens when an item is marked as lost?
Sure. So I guess in brief, nothing much. It's basically a parking spot. It's just another status to indicate that this requested item can't be accounted for, so either the borrower or the lender update it to the status of lost. You can't resolve anything that's lost in terms of reimbursing the lending library for the cost of the item through Share It. Everything would need to be done either through Polaris or over the phone. It's just letting you know that that particular request cannot be resolved, cannot be completed because the item associated with it has been lost.
And we do have one more question about making requests through Find More. So if we had it, and this got pretty specific, so if this is something we don't have an answer to, we'll figure it out later. If we set up Find More to block requests if an item is owned by a CCS library, if that item is not allowed to interlibrary loan within CCS, will Find More take that into account? So if maybe one library has it and they have it in reference or another non-holdable or non-loanable collection, can we still get it?
That's a good question. I'm going to answer this and then maybe defer to Eric. So I would assume that we would not send non-holdable items to Find More, to include those in our collections in Find More. So every month or on a regular basis, CCS is going to send like extracts of our holdings that will then populate the Find More database. I would assume that, again, we won't send non-holdable, non-circulating items as part of our holdings, so that shouldn't matter. But Eric, I saw you unmuted yourself, so feel free to answer that more eloquently than I just did.
No, I can't. You don't really need me. I will do something else because you're spot on. That's exactly it. You will select the records that you upload to the Find More Illinois Union catalog. Anything that's not loaded to the catalog will obviously not be available for requests through Find More Illinois. So if you have a library that has a copy of a title and it's restricted to local use only, they decide not to load that record into the Find More Illinois Union catalog, and no other CCS libraries have a copy of that title, their patron would be able to place a request on that item because the local copy is unavailable.
Perfect. Thank goodness you're here, Eric. I appreciate your help answering all of our questions. Rebecca,
And
any more come in that we want to answer now, or do we want to hold on the rest?
can you just look at Chuse's last question in the chat? Sometimes the lending library places a note that an item could only be read at the library. Would patrons see that, or?
I can address that, Rebecca.
Okay, yeah.
So this is pretty common in interlibrary loan. SHAREit does support the conditional status. So if you have something that's either very fragile or very important to your library and you don't want it to circulate, simply as a lender, if somebody requested it of you, you would reply with a conditional response. And the conditional response would allow you to select the reason for what condition is applied to use of this item. And among the conditions are library use only, signature required, no photocopying, things like that. So yes, you could decide to respond with a conditional response for something that you owned if you wanted to restrict its use. The kind of nifty thing with SHAREit is that if you have a copy of this thing and it's very fragile, so you want to keep it in the library, even if the patron uses it, and you decide, no, that's not good enough, SHAREit will automatically check the next potential lender that has a copy of that item and send that request to them. So conditional is always an option, but it doesn't necessarily kill the potential lender list if you decide to reject a condition, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and when we're kind of going through this lender side, I can show you that conditional setting there, just to help visualize what that looks like.
All right, then I think we're ready to roll, and I will save these other questions for our next set.
Okay. All right, then let's jump into kind of the other side, which is the lending side. So the lending side actually begins in Polaris, and I think this piece is really cool. So when a Find More hold is routed to your library, because of that connection between Polaris and SHAREit, that request will actually be placed on your pick list in Polaris. So in this screenshot I have here, we have our pick list, and the highlighted title, The Topeka School by Ben Lerner, is actually a Find More Illinois request that again has been placed right on my library's pick list. So staff who are processing the pick list would pull any Find More Illinois items or requests as part of their normal daily pick list processing. So when that item is checked in, it will trap for a special patron account, a special Find More Illinois Library patron account set up for your library. At that point, when staff see, oh, this hold request is satisfying a hold for our Find More Illinois account, they would know then that they can give that item to ILL staff to finish processing on the SHAREit end. So I'm going to go hop over to SHAREit and show you what that looks like here. So again, circulation staff have pulled that item as part of their normal pick list processing. It's been identified as a Find More Illinois request. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Find More, and I'm going to open up the request manager. So we had previously been working on this borrower side, but now we're going to shift our focus to the right side, which is our lender request. So when a request is routed to your library, it will show up in your library's list of pending requests. So I'm going to open up my pending requests, and here I'm going to see that request for the Topeka School. So again, I have this item in hand because staff pulled it as part of pick list processing. I'm going to go ahead and open up that request, and I'm going to mark this request as shipped. So when I'm marking this as shipped, I also want to make sure that I am placing in the item's barcode. That barcode is really important for that NSIP connection and communication between SHAREit and the ILS. And then I can kind of make any other updates to this request that are needed at this time. So I know that, Eric, at some point here you can mark it as conditional or mark it as conditional. Can you kind of guide me through that so I can point it out for Chusri?
So under status options, if you click the drop-down menu, you should see conditional,
Okay.
and that will change the next options and the options in the next field. Correct. There you go.
So if you want to have a condition applied to it, you'd select instead of ship conditional, and then you'd be able to pick the reason here. And let's see, special collection supervision required. You would choose from that list there. So we can come back to that in the question portion. So for now, I'm going to choose to mark this request as shipped. I'm going to put in that item barcode, and then I'm going to click submit. So now when I mark this request as shipped, again, SHAREit is communicating back to our Polaris database. So when this item is marked as shipped, Polaris is automatically checking this item out to that special Find More Illinois patron account in our local database. So again, I've marked this item as shipped, and now I need to actually get a shipping label attached to it so I can put it in Rails delivery bin to go on to its destination. So I'm going to go back to my ILL admin menu. I'm going to open up my shipping labels. And again, here I'm going to see all of the items that haven't had their shipping labels printed yet. For this example, I'm going to check the box next to the Topeka School. I'm going to click that Format to Print button. This is going to open up that Rails Find More shipping label. Again, it's got those two sides. It's got the delivery side. It has the return side. I'm going to print it out, fold it in half, make sure that delivery side of the delivery label is face up, attach it to my item, and then pop it into the Rails delivery bin to get sent on to that destination. So now, again, that item is off on its route to another library. So Rachel is kind of going to be acting off screen as the borrowing library that this item is being sent to. So she's going to walk through those same steps we reviewed in the first half. That item gets sent through Rails delivery. It arrives at its destination for the patron. That library is going to get it out of Rails delivery. They're going to mark it as received here in SHAREit. They're going to give it to the patron, check it out to them. The patron's going to take it home, read it, and then they're going to bring it back to that library when they're done. At which point, Rachel or that borrowing library, they're going to mark it as returned, get that shipping label on it, send it back in Rails delivery, and then it's going to eventually arrive back home at my library. So Rachel, let me know when you have returned that item back to me.
All right, I've marked it as received. And I've marked it as returned.
All right, so now that item's going to come back to me through Rails delivery. As staff are unpacking that Rails delivery bin, they'll pull this item out. It will have that return Find More delivery label on it. So staff will know, okay, this one is a Find More item. Let's give it to our ILL staff to finish processing. At which point I'm going to go ahead, pop into my request manager. On my lending side, I'm going to look at my returned requests. So I'm going to open up that list, and this is going to be a list of all of my items that are like en route back to me. So I'm going to go through my list. I'm going to find the title I have in hand. In this example, the Topeka School. I'm going to change the status from returned to check-in, and I'm going to click submit. So again, here, SHAREit's just pushing information back out to Polaris. Polaris will automatically check this item back in off of my Find More Illinois patron account And now this item can go back on the shelf for another patron to check out. So now that brings us to the end of the lending side, which was like very short and very simple. So Rebecca, let's hear all those questions.
Okay. So there are, I think we touched on it already a little bit. If the checkbox for the item for loanable outside of system is not checked, will that block the Find More Illinois request?
You know, that's a great question. And the answer is no. So all these years we've been saying, make sure that setting is right. It's needed for NSIP ILL, and here we are, NSIP ILL time. I have heard from Matt over at Pinnacle that that setting doesn't actually do anything. So no, that really won't matter in this scenario.
Okay. But we will otherwise account for it as we're setting up which holdings we're going to export
Correct.
and send.
Correct. Yes. Yes. So that won't necessarily impact or cause errors within ShareIt. But yes, we will look at all of those settings when we're determining which items should be sent to Find More as eligible to be requested.
What if that returned item has a hold?
Oh, in our system? Ooh. That's a great question. I'm assuming it would just go back on your pick list, right? If your item, once it's checked in, once you return it in ShareIt, it's going to check it in Polaris. If there is a hold, at that time, it would just pop back up on your pick list to be pulled for whoever that patron is.
And if material is returned to a non-CCS library and it makes its way back to its home library, how is the item removed from the patron's account?
I would assume that if it makes it back to the home library somehow, that library would be able to tell that it was a Find More Illinois request, and then could work with whoever the borrowing library was to make sure that is returned and ShareIt. Eric, is there a way for like the owning library to mark something as returned, even if the borrowing library say didn't follow all the steps I demoed?
Yes.
There is. Okay. So in case it never got returned to the borrowing library, it just went right back to the owning library. They have, per Eric, a way to just mark it as returned instead of needing to have the lending or the borrowing library do all those steps.
I think now is a good time for our brief record questions. So, will brief records display when staff are searching for bibs in the Polaris client? And if yes, how will they be identified as Find More Illinois records?
That's a good question. I would assume yes, they'll be able to be displayed in LEAP, just like any other ILL record would be searchable. As for how they're identified as Find More Illinois records, I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint and see if there was any kind of visual cue. This might be a question we have to ask one of our Polaris Find More friends just to see if there is some sort of marker there.
Yeah, and then two related questions while you're pulling that up. It seems like in general, there's maybe concern about, oh, here's another one, about brief records building up. So once the item is returned, what happens to the brief records in Polaris? Are they deleted when the item is returned? And if
Yes.
multiple patrons request, okay, so that's a yes.
Yes.
Hooray.
Mhm.
If multiple patrons request the same titles through Find More, does that result in multiple brief bib records? Probably, because they're coming and going and are ephemeral.
I would assume yes to that one. Eric, if you know the official answer to that, feel free to unmute.
No, exactly. You're right, Rebecca and Deborah. They are ephemeral. They are associated with a specific request, and they are deleted when that request is returned, so they have to be individual.
And they're deleted automatically during that return process. It's not like they're batched and deleted by Polaris at a later
Correct.
date.
Correct. So when it's marked as returned, Polaris again checks it in off the patron's account and then marks the item in bid for deletion. So staff don't manually have to do that. So that should prevent sort of like a queuing up of lots of brief bibs. And here's an example. It's a screenshot. Hopefully you can see it. Yes. Okay. I think you can. So all of the Share It as well as ILL brief bibs do have the ILL flag checked here. But it doesn't look like, at least in this example, there's an additional visual cue that it's from Find More. So that's something maybe we have to learn a little bit more about during sort of the training process.
And just to clarify, because I suggested, like, is there a queue where they're deleted? There is not a queue. Deborah and Eric confirmed that they're deleted as part of that return process. Press return and share it. Brief bib is deleted. So those are our brief record questions. We have another question about patron experience to jump back a little bit. What is the path for patrons who have search requests that turn out not to be in Find More? This is a juicy one.
Oh, the request isn't in Find More.
Yeah.
So then I think that's a really good question of how we can kind of then direct them to, like, let's say WorldShare to search for records. So obviously if they click that link to Find More opens and there's no results there, they're not able to place a request through that interface. So they would either need to then contact the library to see if the item can be requested through OCLC or perhaps purchased depending on, if it's a newer title. So we can continue to talk about how we might want to update that Power Pack No Results Found page to make sure patrons know they have multiple avenues.
And then within Find More, there is a tool called Enhanced Borrowing. And CCS is still learning about that with Rails. Barb, are you here and able to talk about what that is, knowing that we wouldn't necessarily be jumping full 2 feet first into enhanced borrowing?
Yes, I can definitely speak to that. Enhanced borrowing, as it stands now, it's initially a pilot program, but we're more than willing to extend the pilot to CCS. And I've already given Deborah a little bit of background on that. So that's probably something that will be discussed further within CCS. But whoops, not sure that I was completely heard. I'm sorry. So as the pilot program was running or is running, what happens is libraries that participate in enhanced borrowing, if the item is not found in the Find More catalog, then it gets forwarded to Rails office, basically Eric, and he will place, with assistance from other office staff, the request through our OCLC WorldShare account. And then it is sent to Rails, and then we process it to be sent to the library that had requested it. And then the reverse, when it's returned to the library, it gets sent back then to Rails. We check it in at our end, and then we send it back on to OCLC WorldShare. So you're not incurring any of the fees, one, because we don't request anything that asks for, cost to borrow. We also don't borrow anything outside of the United States. So that also helps, one, in keeping the transportation time shorter, and it also means we're not incurring costs. We do pay all the postage and we don't charge anyone for that.
And so, Barb, just to clarify that, enhanced borrowing is only for requests that have been placed successfully in Find More because that title is displayed as an available resource. But for whatever reason, that request cannot be filled. For example, the item has gone missing or is lost.
Yes, if it's not available in, as you know, the search generally starts within your local library's catalog, then it goes to the consortia, then it goes to Find More, and if it's not in Find More, it would get routed to us to place in OCLC. Every so often though, we do run into a title that we can't access either, and then we will notify the library making the request so they can let the patron know that we were unable to locate it.
So, a little bit related, is there a way to integrate OCLC requests into Polaris as a second tier for requests?
That is a great question. Mieko, are you here? Can I put you on the spot here? I know you're here. Would you be willing to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about follow-on searching for OCLC and PowerPack?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we did test follow-on searching and giving patrons the ability to place holds through the PowerPack. And we found that the data that was being transferred between Polaris and OCLC was so minimal that staff weren't able to determine what the patron was actually requesting. So one example we tested was a vinyl record by the Smiths, and format wasn't coming over. Didn't have any. Basically, all you had was a title. So it would have created essentially more work for staff to try to reach back out to the patron and identify what they were after if we had that follow-on searching option.
So it is an option in Polaris in PowerPack, but in our previous testing, didn't seem to be the most efficient way to have patrons place requests because of the minimal info that was being transferred over to OCLC. So correct me if I'm wrong, libraries do have the option to turn it on if they want to, but so far no CCS libraries have done so.
Correct.
So if you're interested in that, go ahead, open a help desk ticket, and we can explore that option with you.
Barb is answering a question in the chat, which is a delight. Does enhanced borrowing require libraries to be OCLC members? And Barb says, no, libraries do not have to be OCLC members to participate in enhanced borrowing. Another enhanced borrowing question is, how does enhanced borrowing work when the item is lost and the patron wants to pay? Do they have to work with Rails instead of their local library staff?
I'm going to defer to Eric on that one, only because he handles the enhanced borrowing more regularly than, I have an understanding of the overview and all, but he would know exactly what happens in that case. Eric, do you mind?
Not at all. Thankfully, it hasn't happened a lot, but when it does happen, I just connect the two parties and they decide how to reimburse, the borrowing library decides how to reimburse the lending library. So it's not an automated process at all. I just connect people and let them resolve the issue themselves. Does that answer the question?
I believe so. We'll see if there's additional response in the chat. Barb's working on another question, which is, can we borrow and lend articles? So we'll see how that shakes out. There are a lot of questions that I'm calling general questions. They're not so much about functionality as they're about Find More the program. So I want to pause to see if there's other functionality questions that I haven't covered yet before we dive into that other set of questions. Okay, so Find More Illinois does not currently handle non-returnables like articles or book chapters that like copies. We don't know if or when it will become available, but it is being considered. There's some general concern about, is it complicated with the Rails OCLC billing situation? And it does seem like it is less streamlined. Like in the event of a lost Find More Illinois enhanced borrowing request, it is maybe more complicated than a traditional OCLC request. But I think the volume would be a lot lower, and this would really be a fringe case scenario. As Eric said, it hasn't come up very often for everybody who's in Find More. So I don't think it would be a regular occurrence in our libraries. Pausing another second for functionality questions. Okay. So Deborah, this hits on the FA. Can you place holds on these short bib records? I don't think so. I mean, they'd be like regular ILL records.
Yeah, and Mieko, correct me if I'm wrong, other patrons can't place requests on ILL records, correct?
Right, that's a setting that can be established in the ILL item template, so we can very easily make sure everything is set to non-holdable.
Perfect. Thanks, Mieko.
Yeah. Let's see if there's another question about or a comment about enhanced borrowing. It seems like it would take a lot of shipping time. Again, I don't know that CCS is a great candidate for enhanced borrowing because we're already OCLC members, and that's something we'd work out with workflow, et cetera, in the future. So a general question about Find More that I know you covered in your previous governing board presentation. Is there an analysis of what percentage of items we've requested through OCLC that would be available in Find More Illinois?
Yes, Rachel did this earlier this year as part of kind of that initial exploration of Find More. And based on that data, so Rachel, Virginia, and Mieko worked to gather, I think, 2 months worth of requests from 4 different CCS libraries. So they looked at those 2 months of OCLC requests and then kind of cross-checked those titles in Find More. So at that time, about 25 to 30% of those requests in OCLC could have been filled through Find More. So that's kind of our estimate, our best guess for how many requests would be routed to the new platform.
And that is something
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Deb.
I was going to say, and that is kind of why, as I mentioned earlier, like we know that Find More is not a replacement for OCLC for us. We have a lot of requests that come from out of state, from academic institutions. And at this time, if we are to move forward with Find More, we would keep both of those resource sharing interfaces. Sorry, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was just going to say, like, as Find More membership changes, that hit rate would change as well. There are libraries that are Find More members now that weren't when we did that testing. I don't think it would make a significant difference at this point. But again, that will continue to change as members come and go from the group. So another couple of questions about Find More membership. Is Rails working to get more academic libraries? The answer is yes. I will defer to Eric and Barb to say if anyone is specifically in the queue for implementations. there was some discussion at governing board at our last meeting of like, oh, there's like Rails is talking with Carly. What's going to happen with Carly? And it sounds like Rails and Carly have set up a process and have like a system in place for Carly members who want to join, but they are not joining in mass. So similar related question, how does iShare impact Rails' ability to attract Illinois universities to find more? Just like CCS is a consortium that meets most of our hold needs, we meet about 99% of all patron requests are filled by CCS materials, and I would imagine iShare is in a similar boat. There are still benefits to find more membership and a philosophical nudge to facilitate resource sharing. So there are benefits for academic libraries to join Find More. I don't know that I certainly can't speak to, again, who's on the list or how much interest there is among the academic community. Eric or Barb, is that something you'd want to speak to, or we can ask for a written response from Anne or Monica for governing board?
I can briefly, without violating the confidence of a potential library, because I'm not comfortable doing that until they've made a decision. I have had one library that has requested, it's a community college in the Chicago area, that has requested, they've returned the quote, they've requested an agreement. I have not received the agreement back yet. So that one is kind of tentatively pending until I get the agreement. I can't say that they're definitively joining. UIC has been a member since Find More was a pilot back in 2018, I believe, is when the pilot started. And we have had two other state universities that have reached out that have talked more with Anne than they have with me. And I know there's been some back and forth, and I don't know where it stands right now. It's not, I don't think that they've completely given up, but there's just been a lot of back and forth. We did meet with Carly, just kind of, Carly was interested in, what is it, kind of as you approached us. So we showed them what it is, what it does. And they, were very receptive, and kind of the same philosophy that CCS is approaching it from, that even though they can fill most of their things, especially for some of the community colleges, the fact that accessing popular materials from public libraries would be really of interest probably to many of their students, and the fact that most community colleges are also community libraries. So this cuts down on their having to spend on those things. Also, we wanted to be sure that, with the whole NSIP thing, as we discussed with you and we discussed with Pinnacle, you always want to make sure that everything's going to work seamlessly. So that was another thing that they ensured, that yes, they want their members to know that if you wish to participate, it's not going to be a problem from a tech issue. Everything should work together very well. The two university libraries that reached out to us recently, it was kind of, like I said, the same thing as you've expressed, in just being part of resource sharing. And because most of the time state universities are in smaller communities surrounded by a lot of even smaller communities, they recognize the benefit it would have, especially in their immediate, say, 50-mile radius of the institution. So if you need further information, I probably would defer to Anne on that she could put something together for your governing board.
Thanks, Barb. Along the same lines, are any other LSAPs in the process of joining or have indicated interest? Can you take that one too, Barb?
Yeah, I say I have not had any entire LSAPs approach me. We do have libraries that belong to LSAPs that join, but we do not have any other, with the exception of Pinnacle is the only one where all the members are. We do have Prairie Cat. We have some RSA, I believe. Eric, you would probably better name some of the other groups that I know we have some members of.
Well, we have most of Rock River Library Consortium. I think the only members that aren't participating from RRLC are some schools. We have a few schools from RRLC participating, but not all of them in RRLC.
Thank you both. Some general functionality questions. Will there be future ShareIt functionality with direct borrowing between ShareIt groups? I know this is something Dee talked about some time ago, like sharing with Wisconsin, for example.
That is something that we have discussed. Wisconsin, we kind of felt like would be a good starting point. I kind of inherited this. I've been with Rails a year. They had discussed, as you said, Dee had started and Anne had had conversation. They also use ShareIt. I believe Indiana is using ShareIt. There is a ShareIt, it's a ShareIt group that's like multi-state that Autographics, which is the company that owns ShareIt, kind of oversees. But within those groups, they found that there are like little broken off regional groups like we're talking about doing. Now, another interesting thing that some of the conversation with Wisconsin has come up with is that Wisconsin has some sort of agreement with Minnesota. Now, Minnesota doesn't use ShareIt, so I'm curious how they make that work. And that's one of those on my list in the near future as I talk to Wisconsin further to find out how that works. And like I said, I want to reach out to Indiana because I'm fairly certain they use it. And I'm just curious, you know, we'd have to work out all the logistics, but it is something that we are talking about and looking into.
Barb, may
Thanks,
I add
Barb.
to that?
Go
Yeah.
ahead, Eric.
Well, I just wanted to mention a little bit more about the broader group that Barb mentioned. So in addition to these neighboring state initiatives that Barb and Anne are looking into, there does exist the Inter-System Sharing Initiative, or ISSI, in ShareIt. Basically, I think it's about 112 libraries that all share things amongst themselves via the ShareIt software.
Thank you. Is Find More data available to patrons from a Google search? Is there a linked data component?
I will defer to Barber or Eric on that one.
No,
Right now,
there
other
isn't.
than, yeah, as I say, there isn't like a specific link. It's, we don't, I mean, we have some data, but it's not, this is something Eric and I have been discussing and more with Anne, that's something we want to develop more of. But right now, the information that we have available, you know, easily accessible, publicly accessible would be through the Find More Illinois page.
Okay. A question about membership. What percentage increase in the number of Find More member libraries will CCS bring if we all join? So I think it is about a 45% increase if we talk about the number of agencies. If like I don't know if we're talking about buildings or, you know, other metrics. Deborah, I think you said it would be almost doubling the number of items in Find More. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Eric was kind enough to send me some numbers on the number of holdings currently in Find More Illinois. So in terms of items or holdings, currently Find More has about 4.7 million holdings, and CCS would bring an additional 4 million, approximately, give or take a few, to that number. So it would be just about doubling the number of items available. Titles is like a little bit fuzzier. I think would be like we have over 1 million titles or bib records we'd be adding. And I think Eric had said there's like 2.4 million titles or bibs currently in Find More. When it comes to number of agencies, there is slightly under 60, and again, we'd be adding our 30. So we'd be increasing about 50% the number of participating libraries there.
I think I missed this functionality question. How do we handle a request from a patron to extend their time?
Oh, yeah. So there are renewals in Find More. So a library can request a renewal of an item just like you can in OCLC.
I think we hit all the questions that we have answers to now. If we missed your question, please pop it in the chat or go ahead and unmute and say, Rebecca, what about my question?
Those were a lot of
Rebecca,
awesome questions. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
There have been a lot of awesome questions. I just wanted to address something that Ben mentioned earlier on, and I feel like I misrepresented the reciprocal borrower aspect. I mentioned that if you have a patron that's a reciprocal borrower, SHAREit will allow that patron to place a request because it's not making a distinction between your resident patrons and your non-resident patrons or RBPs. It's more accurate to say that NCIP and CIP2 aren't making the distinctions between patron types. And because SHAREit uses those protocols for patron authentication, it makes it different for the software to then again say, okay, that's a valid patron at CCS, but because of their patron type, I'm not going to let them place the request. Because those protocols aren't sending those patron types from the local system, SHAREit can't make the distinction. It has been a long-standing enhancement to have some API or some other way to make that distinction, but it's very difficult because the protocols that SHAREit relies on don't send that information.
I wonder if this is something we would be able to address in our setup. And you don't have to answer this now, Eric. I'll just throw it out to the universe. And our reciprocal patrons are registered to CCS as opposed to one of our member libraries. And so only reciprocal patrons are registered to CCS. So I'm wondering if we could exclude CCS as an agency, like we're set up as a library within our own system with those patrons. So we might have a workaround there, but I'm non-committal.
That's a great idea. Definitely look into that. Keep in mind, though, that SHAREit is looking at your patron file. So if you have a single patron file, single shared patron file, you know, if that doesn't work, if your suggestion doesn't work, Rebecca, something else you might want to look at is a non-blocking note in the patron record of an RBP, because patron records with blocks, again, are prevented from placing requests. The trick of it is, it goes back to those protocols. Those protocols often consider notes in a patron record, a benign note, patron lost umbrella, as a block because it's passed in CIP2 or NCIP as a block. So that might be a bit of a kludge if you wanted to make sure that none of your RBPs are placing requests.
I've added this to my list of things to dive into over the next couple weeks so we can make sure we have some options to present to governing board.
And then another great governing board question is coming from Kim Murphy. What about cost? So Kim also asked if there's a cost per library and if there's a discount if all CCS members join together. So yes and yes, Kim. Rails does have Find More Illinois pricing per library. It's a tiered pricing structure based on collection spending. So it's different prices for different libraries. If all CCS libraries join, Rails is offering a 30% discount in year 1 and then a 15% discount in year 2 / the years thereafter. I think I haven't read all of those documents thoroughly. We just got an updated email from Anne yesterday, the day before. I don't but so there is a group discount for sure. CCS, as you probably know, also receives LSAP support grants from Rails. So we get a quarterly check from Rails of state funds passed through Rails to support resource sharing. So as of now, in the past and currently, we have been rebating those funds to our members. We could, and this is something we'll discuss at the governing board level, we could use those funds to pay for Find More and reduce the amount of everybody's rebate. So we wouldn't be like billing specifically for Find More, but you'd be getting smaller rebates. So there is a cost, and that is essentially the question on the table for governing board. We can, as Deborah said, invest in Illinois libraries and support resource sharing outside of our CCS borders and with our neighbors that may not find CCS membership sustainable, but there is a cost to doing that through Find More. And are those benefits worth the cost is the question that we're putting to governing board next month. So I will take a second to kind of touch back to Deborah's introduction. Our goal today was to make sure that libraries understand the basic functionality of Find More. What does it do? How could it work into existing CCS workflows? We know there are some unanswered questions about, specific elements of workflows, but we want to make sure that as we approach that governing board meeting, that you all have the opportunity to speak internally about, is this a good opportunity for CCS as a whole? So your director can be prepared for that November vote. So Kim is asking, the question to governing board would be for the entire consortium to join. Libraries could still opt out. So governing board would be voting, should we as a consortium join? And if that vote is yes, then all CCS members would become Find More Illinois members. Governing board could say no, and then libraries could opt in. If governing board says, we don't think that it's the right time or an appropriate cost, or we all secretly hate resource sharing. That is a joke, not a good one. We don't want to vote yes on this, so we're going to say no. Any library, any CCS member could still join Find More just without that group discount. And CCS would support those libraries, by providing the NCIP connection and doing some of these same things that Deborah discussed already. And we have a note from Bennett Evanston that if governing board doesn't say go all in, that he thinks his library should still join. So you got Eric and Barb, you got one.
I wanted to put a little smiley or a heart or something there, but it seems so juvenile, but it did warm my heart to hear that.
I love it. Deborah, I think we're good on questions, so I will turn it back to you.
I mean, that was all. That was great. That was like 40 minutes of great questions. So thank you everybody so much. I feel like we have a really good base, a lot of things to look into, but this is going to help us kind of get ready for that November governing board discussion. So if you have questions that like percolate in your brain after you sign out of this meeting today, feel free. You can go ahead and email me directly. You can open a help desk ticket. I'm going to encourage all of you to like go back to your library and talk with your colleagues. Make sure you talk with your director, and keep thinking about this, and brainstorming. So again, thank you everyone so much for coming. We really appreciate it. And I'm going to wait to have like 50 tickets opened in the next day with all of your follow-up questions on Find More. I do want to just say a big thank you to Barb and Eric from Rails for joining us here today. we could not have done this without you. You guys are FindMore experts, so we really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through all of our workflow questions. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Indeed, thank you for your interest. Deborah, I have a question to the group.
Sure.
Based on the questions about non-returnables, is that something that CCS libraries are sharing now?
I will defer to the group to pop in the chat of how often you're sharing non-returnables.
I would just clarify that they're sharing through OCLC, not through
Correct, correct.
CCS.
Okay. Okay, good to know.
Oh,
Thank
so
you.
that's the question. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, then I think we are ready to wrap up here. I am going to be sharing this recording in the newsletter tomorrow. There were a lot of questions. I was going to try to get that FAQ up by the time the newsletter went out tomorrow. We'll see if I can achieve that. If it doesn't go out tomorrow, we'll share it out with everybody next week. So again, thank you all for coming, and send us all your questions that weren't answered today. I'm going to stop that recording.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. Have a great day.